Ford reports an $800 million quarterly loss, while GM faces over $1 billion in damages from tariffs, Al Jazeera warned. Detroit's auto giants are bleeding billions as the trade war deepens, echoed the Wall Street Journal. The numbers aren't just abstract. They're factories idling, workers uncertain, families stretched thin. Across the border, Canada positions itself as a safer harbor, luring investment while Detroit burns. But as tariffs reshape the industry, one question looms: who really wins when neighbors turn into rivals? For decades, the auto industry symbolized North America's shared prosperity. Detroit and Ontario were bound by assembly lines that stretched across the border, a seamless choreography of steel, labor, and logistics. Ford, GM, and Chrysler didn't just build cars, they built communities, with suppliers in Windsor, feeding plants in Michigan, and U.S. engineers collaborating with Canadian workers to move vehicles from blueprint to showroom. In this golden period, free trade agreements like NAFTA cemented a sense of mutual reliance, making the border more of a checkpoint than a barrier. But the harmony carried cracks long before the headlines. By the late 2000s and 10s, pressure mounted from global competitors, especially South Korea and Japan, whose efficient plants and cheaper exports challenged Detroit's dominance. Political leaders on both sides began worrying about deficits, job losses, and the vulnerability of depending too heavily on imported parts. As populist rhetoric in the U.S. grew louder, calls for tariffs and America First policies gained traction. Canada, meanwhile, tried to walk a fine line, protecting its workers while keeping doors open to global investors. What began as a shared industrial engine was slowly turning into a fault line, setting the stage for today's seismic rupture. The spark that set the industry ablaze came from Washington. In early 2025, the Trump administration doubled down on tariffs, slapping a 25% levy on imported vehicles and critical components, particularly from South Korea. The move was sold as a patriotic defense, protecting American jobs and forcing foreign automakers to pay their fair share. In reality, the decision exposed Detroit's automakers to a devastating cost surge. Ford reported an $800 million loss in just the second quarter, while GM announced $1.1 billion in damages, projecting up to $5 billion in total hits for the year. Stellantis wasn't spared either, bleeding $350 million in 6 months. The logic in Washington was simple but flawed. By making imports more expensive, U.S. firms would be forced to source domestically, reigniting a golden age of American manufacturing. Yet, Detroit's ecosystem had long been globalized. Many of GM's key components came from Korea. Ford relied heavily on integrated supply chains spread across North America and Asia. Tariffs didn't just punish competitors, they ricocheted back onto American companies themselves. By April, new car prices in the U.S. surged 2.5% in a single month, adding roughly $6,000 to sticker prices compared to the previous year. Consumers balked. Subprime auto loan delinquency hit a historic 6.6%, and dealers watched inventories pile up. The administration touted its later victory in negotiating a revised deal. South Korea agreed to reduce the pain by pledging $350 billion in investments in U.S. energy and industry, including $100 billion in LNG. Tariffs were eased to 15%, but the damage had already been done. Analysts at Morgan Stanley called the outcome avoiding a disaster, not winning a war. Instead of strengthening Detroit, tariffs accelerated a sense of crisis. Ford and GM weren't celebrating. They were bracing for layoffs, delayed model launches, and declining consumer trust. Washington had gambled big, and Detroit was left holding the bill. Canada's response and opportunity. North of the border, Ottawa saw both danger and opportunity. Canadian officials recognized that Detroit's pain could easily spill into Ontario's auto heartland, where cities like Windsor and Oshawa depended on U.S. plants. Yet instead of matching Washington's aggressive tariffs, Canada charted a different path. The government offered temporary tax relief for manufacturers, streamlined cross-border permits, and introduced incentives to attract investment that might flee Detroit's chaos. To many observers, Canada positioned itself not as a combatant in a tariff war, but as a safe harbor for global automakers. The results were swift. Suppliers nervous about volatility in Michigan began shifting contracts northward. European and Asian companies explored Ontario as a stable alternative. Provincial leaders emphasized Canada's balanced strategy, defend domestic jobs while avoiding protectionist excess. Industry analysts pointed to Stellantis's Canadian operations, which continued running with fewer disruptions compared to its U.S. plants. For multinational companies juggling razor-thin margins, Canada's message was simple: invest here, and your business won't get caught in tariff crossfire. Politically, Canada framed its response as pragmatic rather than ideological. Ottawa didn't deny the real pressures of globalization, nor did it dismiss concerns about unfair competition. But instead of walls, Canada offered bridges, subsidies for electric vehicle development, support for green manufacturing, and targeted tax breaks. The aim was to future-proof the industry, not retreat into nationalist rhetoric. This divergence sharpened contrasts. In Detroit, workers faced layoffs, plants idled, and unions demanded answers. In Ontario, while challenges remained, there was an undercurrent of cautious optimism. Canadian officials toured Asia and Europe, pitching the country as a reliable hub in a time of global turbulence. Even as Canada braced for potential ripple effects, it gained credibility as the calmer, more stable partner in North America's auto equation. What emerged was not just economic strategy, but symbolism. While Detroit seemed engulfed in flames, Windsor positioned itself as a city of refuge. The same border that once signified collaboration now highlighted divergence. Canada didn't escape unscathed, but in the battle of narratives, it looked less like a casualty and more like a survivor, perhaps even a quiet winner. A stalemate with no easy exit. Yet beneath the contrasting headlines lies a deeper dilemma. The U.S. cannot decouple from Canada. Their supply chains are too deeply intertwined. Every SUV rolling off a Detroit line carries parts stamped in Ontario. Every sedan in Ontario depends on research and logistics in Michigan. The two economies are bound together like two halves of the same engine. For Washington, walking back tariffs risks political humiliation, admitting that America first hurt Americans most. For Ottawa, leaning too heavily into its role as a safe haven risks provoking retaliation from its most important trading partner. The industry itself remains trapped in a cycle of rising costs, uncertain investment, and geopolitical bargaining. Both countries face a paradox: compete and both risk long-term decline. Cooperate and both risk political backlash at home. Workers, consumers, and entire communities are caught in the middle, unsure whether tomorrow brings new contracts or new layoffs. The standoff is not just about economics. It's about identity, sovereignty, and the future of an industry that once defined North America. In Windsor, Ontario, the city often called Detroit's twin, the ripple effects were immediate. Auto parts supplier Linamar, which feeds both GM and Ford assembly plants, suddenly faced shifting contracts as U.S. orders slowed. Ottawa's temporary tax relief cushioned the blow, but uncertainty weighed heavily. Workers worried about layoffs, while smaller suppliers without deep reserves struggled to survive the volatility. Stellantis's Canadian operations, though more stable than its U.S. counterparts, still dealt with cautious investment strategies, with executives delaying new equipment purchases until cross-border conditions settled. At the community level, the anxiety was palpable. Local diners and shops that thrived on auto workers' paychecks saw fewer customers. Municipal leaders warned that even with Canada's safer policies, the country couldn't fully insulate itself from Detroit's downturn. The message was stark. Canada's relative stability didn't mean immunity. While Ottawa managed to soften the impact, Windsor still bore the weight of an industry forever tied to its American neighbors' fortunes. Across the river in Michigan, the story was harsher. At a Ford plant outside Detroit, shifts were cut, and hundreds of workers found themselves sent home early. Victims not of foreign competition, but of tariffs imposed by their own government. Dealers reported buyers walking away as sticker prices soared by thousands. Families who once dreamed of owning a new car faced the reality of higher monthly payments or settling for used vehicles. The delinquency rate for subprime auto loans hit 6.6%, a painful sign that working-class households were reaching their breaking point. Small businesses tethered to the auto supply chain were equally squeezed. A tool and die shop in Dearborn that once thrived on GM contracts now struggled to cover payroll. Meanwhile, corporate headquarters in Detroit spoke of strategic adjustments, corporate code for downsizing and delaying future models. The very policies designed to reignite U.S. manufacturing had left American consumers, workers, and businesses paying the heaviest price, deepening the sense that Washington's gamble had misfired. Detroit reels from mounting losses, while Windsor cautiously absorbs the shock. Washington clings to its rhetoric of protection, and Ottawa plays the role of stabilizer. Yet beneath the strategies, workers on both sides of the border face the same fears: jobs vanishing, costs rising, futures uncertain. The dilemma is no longer national, it's continental. In the race to shape tomorrow, will North America win together or lose together by going it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story below.